All right, so here we are ready for the workshop. I'd like to introduce Trent Pettus to everybody. Um, Trent has been a great contributor to the association over the years, and he loves doing these classes. He may say he's a real estate agent or a realtor, but I think he's an educator at heart, and you'll see that on display today. One of the things that we would like to ask everybody, please consider putting yourself on camera. Trent likes to see everybody's face, and he also likes to hear everybody's voice if they have different questions or thoughts, because this is your class, not his class, and your participation in it can really help along. Donna will be dropping a link into the chat that will be going to all the different documents that we'll be talking about today. So with that, we're a little bit envious of Trent, even though we got a big football game here in Philadelphia and we're all pumped up for that. Temperature's been cold here, but he's in sunny, warm Florida. So don't rub it in too much, Trent. Good morning.
Good morning. Well, actually, it was chilly. We have a cold front in South Florida. I think it's only 60 right now. So it is a cold front. So, and it's only getting to 70 today. So don't feel bad for me. All right. All right. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Happy Friday. Can you all turn videos on, as Matt said, if you can, because I can't see on my computer. I'm looking at my big screen TV, and I do a better job when I can see people. So I can see you on the screen. So I appreciate it. First, let me congratulate my friend Annette Collier on becoming the president of GPAR last night. Annette is a wonderful, wonderful person. I think she's going to be a great president. She's just a good, decent, hardworking person, great broker, friend, and I'm really proud of her, and I'm happy for her. So you get a chance, say congratulations to Annette and to the whole leadership team. And Matt, and I always forget to thank Matt and Cheryl and Donna and the others who work at GPAR. GPAR is probably, I know, the best association in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And I'm not biased. I just believe they are. And so I'm sure there are people from other associations on. We happen to have the best association. I know all associations in the Commonwealth are good, but I think GPAR is just special. It really is. And so, Matt, so let me just say thank you. All right. I really appreciate everything you and everyone else does for this association. All right. All right, Joe. Let's get started there. As Matt said, I like to be interactive. And I know we have people here who are newer agents. We have a lot of seasoned agents. I see my good friend Carolyn Dixon Pugh, who's been around for a long time. I want to tell Joanne. I see a lot of people been around. And so if you want to add anything, I don't know it all. We can all do this together. So let's all learn together. And so if you have anything to share, feel free. But let's kind of talk about this. First of all, we know since NAR settlement, there are two things that are required of realtors. One, that we must have a buyer agency contract before we show a property. All right. So I'm sure by now we're all doing that. Oftentimes, including myself, some older experienced agents probably showed properties and wrote up a buyer agency contract when they wrote up a contract. All right. We can't do that anymore. So if you've been around, you know what I'm talking about. And so that's one of the things that we have to do. And the other thing is, of course, Bright can no longer have broker compensation in MLS. Now, I thought maybe this was going to be an issue, but so far it has not. Agents have been pretty good with, returning calls or being accessible and letting me know if there is broker to broker cooperative compensation. So for me, it's not been an issue at all. I think the buyer agency contract part is a good thing because a lot of us, and I was guilty of that, was showing properties, representing buyers, but we didn't have a contract and they didn't know what their obligations were to me. And I didn't really they didn't know what they needed to do. And nothing was clear because nothing was in writing. And if there was an issue, God forbid, if there's an issue, you know, you don't have a contract. So I think that's a good thing. But let's kind of get started. If that's it, I always like to start with the consumer notice. And feel free, anytime you want to interrupt, you have a question, we'll get to the buyer agent the contract in a minute. First document you always have to sign is a consumer notice. And if you look at the consumer notice, it says that in an effort, now the thing is, it says it's not a contract. We know a consumer notice is not a contract. And it says it so sometimes consumers, because they haven't signed a contract yet, they may be hesitant to sign anything. So you simply highlight this and say, this is not a contract. This is a form. This is a disclosure that's mandated by law that I must give you this. It explains the different business relationship choices that you could have with me as your agent. All right. You can be the buyer's agent, clearly, if you're coming to me looking to buy a property. If you're looking to sell a property, clearly you could be the seller's agent. I could be both the buyer and the seller's agent. I would be a dual agent. I could be a transaction licensee where I'm a non-agent. I don't represent anyone. Basically, what I do is paperwork. But when do you have to give this form? Take a look at the top paragraph. It says, in an effort to enable consumers of real estate services to make informed decisions about the business relationships they may have with real estate brokers and salespeople or licensees, the Real Estate License and Registration Act, and I'll prefer that. That's just our licensing laws. If I say licensing law, we're talking about the Real Estate License and Registration Act, or RELRA. Requires that consumers be provided with this notice at the initial interview. What is the initial interview? Well, RELRA defines the initial interview as anytime you have a substantive conversation about real estate. All right, substantive not meaning that you call up and ask me what's the zoning classification or the price of the house or the number of bedrooms. When I start having a significant conversation with you about real estate, hey, do you have a pre-approval, or I've saved this amount of money, you should give that person a consumer notice. A lot of people put it on there. If they email in properties, they have to click, they have to read this before they can see properties. A lot of agents put it on their email, so if they communicate with you, it's there. But if you're having a conversation over the telephone with a client and you cannot, for any reason, get them consumer notice, there's an oral consumer notice that you must read verbatim. All right. But so just keep in mind, it's always, in my opinion, best to give out this consumer notice when you first meet them, before you get into a substantive conversation about real estate, because then they start giving you confidential information, and if they give out confidential information to you without being a client, then that confidential information is not confidential. Okay. So I think it's just a good practice when you meet someone and you start talking about real estate, say, hey, could you just sign this consumer notice? How long do you have to keep this consumer notice if it does not turn into a transaction? That's one of the things I think agents, even older agents, I should say experienced agents, sometimes forget. How long do you have to keep this consumer notice? You show someone a property today, they never come back, they don't sign a buyer agency contract. How long are you required to keep this consumer notice? Anybody?
6 months.
For 6 months. For 6 months. Thank you. Very good. 6 months you have to keep this consumer notice, and make sure if it turns into a transaction and it goes into a file, clearly the broker is going to has to keep the file for 3 years, so that'll be in a file. But if you're going to just show a property to someone and nothing comes of it, make sure you technically only have to keep the signed portion, but I would just keep the whole thing. You have to keep this for 6 months. So if the real estate commission stops by your office and they want proof that you have given a consumer notice to consumers during this last 6 months, you should have this, keep it somewhere, so that if anyone asks, you can show proof that you gave a consumer notice to these consumers. Any questions or comments? All right, none. Let's go to the buyer agency contract or agreement. All right, we're only talking about the exclusive buyer agency contract, and there is a non-exclusive. I was going to say what's the difference, but let's look at it and we'll see the difference here. The exclusive buyer agency contract, and I like that the standard forms added these paragraphs at the beginning. The old form did not have these, but let's just look at it. It says a buyer owes A buyer agent owes duties of loyalty and confidentiality to a buyer. Loyalty means what? That you always put your interest, you always put the interest of your clients above anybody and everybody else's interest, including your own. Your buyer's interest, the interest of your client, in this case of buyers, should be the top priority. And if there is any kind of conflict, then you should disclose it, which this contract will say, and you should disclose it immediately. So you always have to put the interest of your client, in this case a buyer, above everyone else's, including yours, and everything that buyer says to you is confidential, and it's confidential forever. It does not end when this contract ends. It never ends. Confidentiality extends beyond the terms of this contract. Confidentiality lasts forever. Second paragraph reads, in an exclusive buyer agency contract, and that's what we're going to deal with primarily today. In an exclusive buyer agency contract, you agree that you will work with only one buyer agent, only one company. You're going to work with one buyer agency for a certain time period, and that you could owe a buyer's fee to this broker if you purchase the property on a term. Contact another. So in other words, we know that an exclusive buyer agency contract, the buyer hires one company to represent his or her interests. If that guy, let's say this contract expires at the end of March. Well, if this buyer locates a property before this term expires, let's say end of March of this year, it does not matter who introduces that buyer to the property. And as long as that buyer buys a property during the term of this contract, the broker has earned the commission. All right. A non-exclusive is, well, I don't want to bring that up. And so exclusive, you've hired one broker. Now, let me go on because I'll mention that. So in an exclusive buyer agency, you agree that you're going to work with one buyer agent for the time period. And if you go and you enter into another exclusive buyer agency, if that buyer does, that buyer may owe two commissions to two different brokers. So you need to make sure your buyer understands that this is an exclusive buyer agency contract and you can only enter into one of them. You can't even enter into a non-exclusive buyer agency during the term of this contract. All right. So make it clear, you're hiring my company to work with you for the term of this contract. Do not go out and enter into another contract with another brokerage, because then you may owe two commissions, as I said, to two different companies. All right. Next paragraph says, do not sign this contract until you've read the entire agreement, document, discuss any questions you have. Always make sure the buyer understands this. Now, we're going to go through this whole contract. Obviously, most times you're just skimming through it. Some buyers don't want to, you just say, tell me where to sign. But make sure a buyer understands, and you should go through at least to highlight the most important parts, in your opinion, that's in this contract, and at least go over those of the buyer. And before this buyer puts his or her signature on it, make sure that buyer understands what's in it. If they don't, and if they ever say, I think I want a lawyer to take a look at it, or I want to get some advice, never say to a client that he or she is not a good idea to seek the advice of a lawyer. Never discourage a person from seeking out the counsel of a lawyer. If they want legal advice before they sign this, then you should say, fine, do that and get back with me. All right. All right. Obviously, the broker information is on the left-hand side. Put the name of the company. Obviously, the broker is the company. The license number, the address, phone number, all the broker's information is on the left-hand side. The right-hand side is your information, the licensee. Now, if there are more than one licensee, sometimes there are two agents who are representing that one client. You ought to put both licensees' information here. So if you have a co-agent or co-buyer's agent, then put that co-buyer's information here also. Both agents' information should be here if there is more than one agent who's working with that buyer. Obviously, if you want to put the buyer's name, the buyer's mailing address, phone number, And remember, this is a contract that no one else is going to see. This is for your file. So you should put as much information here as possible, because if you ever have to get in touch with this buyer after this contract expires, or if this buyer didn't buy anything, if you have to get in touch with this buyer, you have the information in this buyer agency contract. Buyer understands that this exclusive buyer agency contract is between the buyer and the broker. I think sometimes just new agents, and when I teach students at Temple, I always remind agents, new agents, that contracts are between the broker and, in this case, the buyer. Listing contracts are between the broker and the seller. This is not your contract. You are general agent of that brokerage, and if you leave that company, this contract stays behind, even if it's your mother's house. It doesn't matter. This, unless the broker will allow you to, to terminate it, allow the buyer to terminate it, and you can go sign a new contract at the new company. But contracts are between the company and the client. If you are a licensee or salesperson, you're just a general agent of that company. Contracts are between the buyer, in this case, and the broker. And buyers need to understand that too, that the contract is not between you and the buyer, it's between the company and the buyer. Any questions or comments? All right. Buyer understands. Does a buyer have a written agreement such as a buyer agency contract with another broker? Obviously, this is important, because if the buyer says to you, I have another contract with a different company, that should be a red flag to you. Now, look at what it says. It says, does a buyer have a written agreement? It doesn't say what kind of written agreement. Written agreement could be a listing contract. A written agreement could be a non-exclusive buyer agency contract, which would not interfere with the representation of this contract. So if a buyer says to you, oh, yes, I have a written contract with another company, you should obviously ask, what is that contract? Well, they may say, I have a listing contract with another company. I'm selling my house, but I don't want to use that company. I want you to represent me when I look for a new property. Well, then that wouldn't affect you. You would be able to enter into an exclusive buyer agency contract with that buyer, because the listing contract and the buyer exclusive buyer agency contract are two types of contracts. If they said I have a non-exclusive buyer contract, well, a non-exclusive means that I can hire as many companies as I want to help me find a property, and the company that introduces me to the property that I end up buying, that's the company I have to pay. But if I find the property myself, then I don't have to pay that company. So you could actually the buyer could have a non-exclusive buyer agency contract and enter into an exclusive buyer agency contract with you. So, but if they say I have a exclusive a buyer agency contract with another company, that's where you have to stop. And that's where you need to seek out the advice of your manager or your broker, because now, if they said, I'm going to enter into an exclusive buyer agency contract with you, but I also already have an exclusive buyer agency contract with another brokerage, then they may have to owe commission to two different brokerages. So they really need to understand the legal implications of what they may be enter into. And you probably don't want it. Well, I'm not going to say, you should seek out the advice of your broker or your manager, because I'm a broker in my company. I'm not going to allow a broker to enter into an exclusive agency contract with me when I know they have one with another company, because now they're obligated to pay possibly two commissions, and I'm not going to be looking out for the best interest of that buyer. Does that make sense, everyone? Am I going too fast, too slow? Any questions?
Excuse me a moment. John Szymanski, and good morning, John. John asks through the chat, do these buyer agency contracts only apply to the sale of residential properties? And what is considered abandonment by an agent?
Does this apply? This only applies to residential, not commercial. Is that what you're asking? And not to leases. There's a tenant agency contract you should use if you're dealing with a tenant. Abandonment, I think that's subjective. I serve on professional standards. I mean, you could, if I don't, there is no definition that I could give you. If I could say, if an agent, if I'm representing a buyer and the buyer is contacting me, he or she wants to buy a particular property. Well, let me give this. Let's say I'm supposed to show a buyer a property tomorrow and I don't show up. And the buyer contacts me, the buyer can't get in touch with me. And then they've been trying to get in touch with me. Is a property they really want to buy, is a seller's market. There's a lot of interest in the property. They go to another agent. Would I argue that you abandoned that contract? You abandoned that buyer? I would. But I think whenever you look at those issues, you have to look at everything in the totality. But abandonment, basically, when you abandon your client, when the client can't get in touch with you, what are they supposed to do if they're trying to purchase a property, but they can't reach you? They may go somewhere else. But again, I think it's all subjective. All right. Let's go back down to paragraph 1, start and end dates of the buyer agency contract. No law or association of realtors is set or recommended the term of this contract. We know that, and that's always been the case. But since the NAR settlement, we have to make that clear that this contract is being negotiated between the broker and you, the buyer. There is no input from GPAR or Tri-County or the National Association of Realtors or the Penn. We are negotiating the terms of this contract. No outside organizations or entities have any input as to what our negotiations entail. All right. The broker and the buyer have discussed and agreed upon the length of this term. Again, they have negotiated without any input from any licensing law or any association of realtors. This contract applies to any property the buyer chooses to purchase during the term of this contract. That's what makes it an exclusive buyer agency contract, that the contract applies to any, keyword there is any property that the buyer chooses to purchase during the term of this contract. Buyer will not enter into a buyer agency contract with another broker that begins before the end date. That's why if you go back to the question, do you have a written contract with someone else? If they say yes, then there may be implications, consequences for that buyer. Again, that buyer, if they enter into if they already have an exclusive buyer agency contract and about to enter into one with you, they have to pay two different brokers 2 commissions. So you're saying to the buyer, you will not enter into another buyer agency. And remember, that's not just an exclusive buyer agency contract. Buyer agency could be an exclusive or a non-exclusive. The buyer will not enter into a buyer agency contract with another broker that begins before the end date. Again, that could be an exclusive buyer agency contract or a non-exclusive buyer agency contract. The starting date, this contract will start when signed by both the buyer and the broker. I always think it's a good idea for you to sign second. Let the clients always sign first, because when you sign it, then you know the execution date. So if I send it to the buyer today and the buyer signs it Saturday and gives it back to me Monday, but forgets to date it, and I sign it Monday, and now this contract lasts for 30 days, and the buyer says, oh no, this contract is over next in 28 days because I signed this contract on Saturday. I don't know when you signed it because you didn't date it. You got it back to me on Monday, but maybe you signed it. It just could be confusing. Always let them sign it and make sure they date it. And then when you get it back, once you date it, you know this is the start of this contract. Don't you sign it first and give it to them. Always let them sign it first. And then when they get it back, you sign it. And now you know the execution date is the date that the last party signs the contract. Any questions, comments? Where am I? Oh, the end date. This contract ends 11:59 p.m. on, put a date. Now, here's one thing I want to say to especially younger, newer agents. Buyer agency contracts don't have to be for months at a time. A buyer agency contract, I've done them for one house. I've done them for one weekend. I've done them for one day. If buyers say, I don't want to enter into a 6-month contract or a 3-month contract or a 1-year contract, you could say, all right, you're going out this weekend. I'm showing you 8 properties. We'll sign a buyer agent, an exclusive buyer agency contract for the weekend only. So if you purchase anything this weekend, then you owe me a commission. You owe the brokerage commission. This thing will expire 11:59 Sunday night. So at midnight on Monday or midnight Monday morning, then this contract has expired. Sometimes you have to do that with buyers who are skeptical or hesitant to enter into contracts for months at a time. So just be mindful of that. It does not always have to. Now, I'm not saying do what your company, your brokerage says. If your brokerage says, I want a minimum, 3 months, clearly you have to do that. I'm not saying go against your broker. I'm saying that if your broker has given you the latitude to enter into, for you to decide, and you have a buyer who says, I don't want to be with you for, no, what if I don't like you? Or what if I don't want a 3-month contract? You can do short term. Has anybody, experienced agents, have you all done that? Can someone just say something so I know y'all can hear me? Somebody just say something.
Friend is Carol. I've done it for one house.
For one house.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Joanne was saying something too, but I think she was muted.
Yeah, sure. I've done it.
Okay. So see, and these are 2 very highly skilled, competent, been around a long time, great agents. So they've done it, then you could do it too. Okay. All right. So the contract ends. So the start date, the end date. Make sure you don't put things like 30 days. It could be confusing. 30 days from when was the execution date? Put a date. If it's going to end March 31st, put March 31st. If it's going to end June 15th, put June 15th. Don't say 45 days from today. They can be confusing when you don't know when the execution date is. Just always make things as easy for you as possible. I just don't believe in complicated situations. Make them easy, simplify them. So listen, it doesn't seem like a problem if you put 30 days from today now, but it may be a problem when it becomes a problem, okay? When you can't figure out when the execution date is. But we know March 31st, okay? We know March 31st this thing ends. But if I say 30 days from the day, is it March 24th? Is it March 23rd? Is it March 22nd? We could have issues. So just put a date and you avoid all that. Would you all agree with that? 1C, if buyers negotiate or enter into an agreement to sell, this contract ends upon settlement. I want you all to understand this. And I thought of it this morning, probably a few years ago. I'm representing a buyer. I get a call from another agent saying, hey, Trent, I think we're going to settlement. For some reason, he knew he had worked with this buyer. This buyer bought a house like 2 months early, did not like this broker, said, I want to buy a different house. He actually ended up buying like 5 or 6 houses. But he says, I don't want to work with this broker again. I didn't like it. So, but they had an exclusive buyer agency contract. And of course, I want you to read that again. This contract ends upon settlement. So even if it expires June 30th, it ends upon settlement. If you close January 24th, this contract ends. So I get a call from this broker saying, hey, Trent, you owe me a commission because you're working with my buyer. And I said, I don't know what you mean. He says, well, you're working with my buyer. I have an exclusive buyer agency contract with John Smith. I just make up a name. And any properties he purchases until this contract expires, I'm entitled to the commission. And I said, I want you to pull out an exclusive buyer agency contract. So he did, and I took him to paragraph 1C, and I said, take a look at that. It says the buyer is negotiated or is entered into an agreement to sell. This contract ends upon settlement. So I said, so when this buyer, my buyer now, purchased that property, your contract ended. And he said to me, I didn't know that, and I didn't know that was there. I always say to agents, you'll be a smarter agent than many others if you take time to read these documents. This is a broker who's been around. I know I've done at least 6 deals with him. I mean, I don't like him either. Though I understood why the buyer didn't like him, because he's kind of sleazy. And so every time I do a deal with him, I feel like I have to go in the shower. That's how I always feel. Every time I do a deal, I feel dirty. So, so if you know what's in the contract, you'll serve your clients better, and you'll be a better agent all around. Take time to read what's in these contracts, because there are agents out there who just don't know. All right. Any questions or comments? All right, go to paragraph 2B. First paragraph is talking about no law association has recommended the term of this contract. The second paragraph talks about no law association of realtors has set or recommended a broker's fee. So again, you're saying to your buyer in this case that the fee that I will charge is negotiated between the broker and the buyer. No, with no input from any other brokers, with no association of realtors. What we negotiate is between us and you only. All right. And so buyer and broker have negotiated the fee. Now, look at B, the broker's fee. Now, since the NAR settlement, you have to be a little bit careful here. All right. In a purchase transaction, B1A, if there is a seller represented by a real estate broker, the fee is blank. You can put a percent. Let's just make up, I'm going to say 10%. I'm not just making up numbers. The fee is 10% of the purchase price, or let's say $15,000. And blank, maybe your office charges a conveyancing fee or transaction fee or some other flat fee. That would go there. So you can either put a percentage. We want 10%. Of the purchase price, or you want a certain flat fee. I want 15,000, and I want X. I want another $1,000 as a transaction fee, because that's what my office charges the buyers. I'm just making these examples. This is just example. I'm making these numbers up. All right. So now here is the issue. Whatever you put in this contract, the buyer is responsible. Well, let's go back. Let's say you put in here 15,000. Your fee, I'm charging you, Mr. Buyer or Mrs. Buyer, 15,000 flat fee. If the seller is offering you $12,000 flat fee, there's a $3,000 difference. The buyer, does the buyer agency have a minimum term? I believe it's 1 year. I think they're both. I know listing contract is 1 year. I'm assuming, and it's funny, I never could find that anywhere. Can somebody help me out there? That was a good question. The listing contract is clear. It cannot be more than 1 year, 365 days. I have never seen anywhere where it says the buyer agency contract can't be more than a year. I'm kind of assuming it's a year. Does anybody know the answer to that? Because I can't seem to find it every time I look up that question. And by that way, I looked it up this morning thinking somebody would ask me, and you asked me, and I don't know the answer. But now I'm going to find out the answer, because I can't find it anywhere. So I don't believe, I'm 100% certain that a listing contract cannot be more than 1 year. A buyer agency contract, I believe, but I have never seen anywhere in the Real Estate License Registration Act or the Real Estate Commission's rules and regulations about the length of a buyer agency contract. If somebody can find it, please let me know. I've never seen it. It's 1 year. All right. The minimum is 1 year. After 1 year, you need it. Right. Okay. So it is 1 year for both. I kind of thought that. I just never could see it in print. Okay. Thank you. All right. So now go back to, you are asking for $15,000 to be paid from the buyer. The listing agent is offering a commission, a broker corporate compensation of $12,000. According to this, and we'll look at this, the buyer now owes you that $3,000. So make sure you understand, and make sure your buyer understands that whatever's negotiated here, if the seller is offering less, there is a deficiency or deficit that must be made up by the buyer. Now, MLS does not want you to do this. Okay, you can't just say, oh, there's a $3,000 difference. I'm just going to exclude, I'm just going to wipe it out. I'm not going to come after you. Now, I may have some issues with some of this, but I follow the rules. So technically, you're not supposed to now, because if you just said, okay, I'm just not going to collect the difference of $3,000, then you're really going back to why there are lawsuits, and you're just accepting whatever the seller offered as compensation. So you need to make sure you understand that if you collect less commission than what the buyer has contracted to pay you, that buyer would owe you the difference. Does everybody understand that? Let's go on. Let me show you this. So just be mindful of that when you negotiate these contracts. All right, let's look at. So let's go look at B2, 2B2, advance fee. Some people may charge an advance fee. It's just an upfront fee or retainer, they call it. If you do, you can have a non-refundable. I may say I'm gonna charge $2,000 upfront non-refundable fee. Obviously, if you don't buy anything, you don't get the money. But if you do, keep in mind that upfront fee. Let's say you charge a $2,000 upfront fee, and the buyer is responsible, I say, of paying $15,000 to you. That $2,000 has to be deducted from the $15,000. It's not in addition to the $15,000. It would be a part of the $15,000. So if your flat fee, if you're charging this buyer a commission of $15,000 and you're charging an upfront fee, a non-refundable upfront fee of $2,000, then that $2,000 should be deducted from the $15,000, and they would owe you $13,000, not $17,000. It wouldn't be $15,000 plus $2,000. It would be $15,000 minus $2,000. All right. So look at 4, and this is in bold, and this is something that has to be, I believe this is mandated that this be in our broker contracts, our exclusive buyer agency contracts. Broker will not retain any amount greater than the broker's fee agreed to in paragraph 2B, regardless of the source. Okay, you cannot scratch this out. You can't waive this section. This is a requirement as a result of the NAR agreement. In other words, you say to the buyer, you say, I want you to pay me a commission of $15,000. That's what you agreed to in this contract. The listing agent is offering $20,000. What do? Can you then just go back and amend your exclusive buyer agency contract? No, you should do that. It just means you can't take the extra $5,000. Okay. Now, could you could do one or two things. You could say to the seller's agent, of course, I think it'd be silly, I don't want the $5,000, keep it. Or you could say, because you can't take it, you can say, let me take the $5,000 and apply it to the closing costs of my buyer, if they can still get it. Or maybe they can't get any more closing costs. Maybe you can get a home warranty, but that money can go towards the buyer, but it can't go towards you. You can't accept anything more than what you negotiated in your contract, because a true negotiation would be the $15,000. So if you start getting more, then that's not really a true negotiation, because now you're saying, oh, well, I really don't want 15, I really want 20, or, oh, I'm only getting 12. Well, you don't have to pay the difference. So whatever your negotiation is, let that be your negotiation. If you want $15,000 from this buyer needs to understand that he or she owes you $15,000. And if you get 15 from the seller, then they owe you nothing. But if they get 12 from the seller, they owe you 3. So you need to make that clear to them that if there is a deficit or deficiency, then they have to make it up. And it's here. Any questions or comments? I'd like to hear from somebody.
Yes. Hi, Trent.
Yes, Joanne.
So I'm surprised because in our teachings, we were told what you said. Let's say we put down 3% in the buyer agency contract. That if it's less, I did not know that we had to get that 3%, that the buyer either had to make it up to us or that with their permission, we could ask the seller for an additional commission
Yeah,
as part of the contract. I
right.
did not know that we had to get that amount. That's one thing. And the other thing I didn't know, I thought I thought you were allowed to say to your buyer, I put down, which by the way, that's why I would always put down 3% because I would not be able to, if they were offering 3 and I had down 2.5, I couldn't get the 3.
Right.
So,
But then if they offer 2.5, then you put down 3 and they're offering 3.5, you clearly couldn't get the other half. You can only get the 3.
right, but nobody's
And if they're
much
offering,
is offering 3.
and if
Right.
they're offering 2 and you put 2.5, you put 3 and they're offering 2.5, your buyer has to, the buyer now owes 0.5% to your company.
But I didn't know that we had to take that.
Well, I believe now, now if your brokerage is selling something, I believe the MLS rules and what they're teaching. Now, I don't agree with everything I'm saying to you, but this is what I'm told
Yeah,
it is.
I understand.
I want to go here, but I would say this, that we don't look at this. If the buyer, and I thank you, Joanne, let's go back to my example. The buyer is offering, the seller is offering, what did I say, 15. They're giving you 15. Your contract says that you want 15,000 from the buyer. The seller is offering only 12,000. This contract says, and I'll show you where it says that the buyer authorizes you, Joanne, to go back to that seller and try to get the difference of 3.
Right.
That is here. And you're absolutely right there. So that's the first thing you should do is say, and you would use the cooperating broker compensation form. You would say, hey, seller, can I get an additional 3% commission? Because my buyer is, my buyer would have to pay 3,000. Well, I don't know when you get to that, but I wanted to renegotiate the commission. I would like an additional 3%. So the buyer is authorizing you to do that. Or the buyer is saying, or you can say to that listing agent, if you're not going to give me increased commission, can you give my buyer some seller concessions of 3,000? And remember, the seller concessions can be used to pay the broker fee. That's one way.
Brent, I have a question. It's Carolyn. I'm a little confused about on paragraph 2, capital letter B, B1, and then B, where it says with a seller who is not represented by a real estate broker.
Right. A FSBO.
Can you give me so that could be a FSBO?
B1B is a seller who is not represented. That's an unrepresented seller of FSBO. So
that would be that example would be a FSBO?
Yeah, that's a FSBO.
Okay. All right then.
So if you the first one, it says a seller represented by a real estate agent. The second one with a seller who is not represented by a real estate broker, that's an unrepresented seller or FSBO, or for sale by owner.
Okay, got you.
All right, go back up to, let's keep on going here because we don't come up to some of the things that we're just talking. Look at C. If buyer leases a property, instead of buying a property, buyer's fee is blank. Well, if you are using, if you actually not looking to purchase, if the buyer's looking to rent, then you really should be using the tenant agency contract. But let's say last minute, you're showing properties that, you found properties, they're like, you know what, I just think I'm gonna just rent. Well, if you put a fee in here because you still spent a lot of time with this buyer, and this buyer decided after 3 months, I'm just going to rent. Well, if they find a property to rent within this time period, within the term of this contract, you could still earn a fee. So if you know, a lot of people may just put an NA, but if it's possible that this buyer may not buy and end up renting. So protect yourself by putting in what you would want as a fee if that person decides to rent. D, even though the broker's fee or portion of it may be held by a seller or listing broker, broker will continue to represent the interest of the buyer. Obviously, it does not matter the source of compensation. Your duty is to the person you have a contract with. It does not matter. Okay? It doesn't matter who pays the commission or the source of the commission. Your duty is always to the person, the client, the principal who you have a contract with. And you owe those fiduciary duties, one of which being loyalty that we talked about in confidentiality. Even though a broker's fee number 1D1, if a broker's policy is to accept compensation offered by a listing broker called cooperating compensation, if a listing broker offers cooperating compensation that is less than the broker's fee in the paragraph, okay? Go to that example. You say 15,000, what your fee is. The listing agent or the cooperating broker is offering 12. Broker may authorize, so we are, Joanne, may authorize a broker to negotiate an increase by using a form such as a cooperating broker compensation form. So here is saying, hey, if you want me to pay a broker fee of 15,000, the seller is only offering 12. I want you to go back and see if you can get the 3,000 from the seller. That's what I'd want you to do. Okay. And 2, it says sellers sometimes offer to make financial concessions, which could include some or all the broker's fee. Buyer can negotiate these seller concessions by including them during the sale. All right. So we know you can negotiate separately. You can negotiate the buyer's fee, and you can also negotiate seller concessions, or what we know is seller assist. Seller concessions, mind you, could be used to pay broker fee. So let me give another example. Your contract says I want $15,000 fee. The seller is offering $12,000 commission to the buyer broker, but the seller is also giving a $5,000 concession to the buyer. Well, that 3,000 of that 5,000 can be used to make up the deficit. So that 3,000, that 5,000 come to the broker as part of their fee. So now they have the total 15,000, and then 2,000 would go to the buyer as seller assist. That clear? The bottom line is seller concessions can be used to pay be used to help pay the buyer's closing costs, or can help pay what the buyer owes a broker fee, the fee that the buyer owes to the broker. Any questions? Are you all quiet because you listen, or you're quiet because you're bored, or you're quiet because of what?
There's questions in the chat, Trent.
Oh, I can't see the chat. I don't know. Is somebody, Donna, are you? I don't know where the chat is. Could somebody read one for me?
Let's see. So where should I start at? Because there's multiple questions. I'll start backwards. It says, Victor Strong asked, should you ask the seller what the commission is prior to the offer?
Yes, let's start there. Absolutely. You should always ask a seller, is there broker-to-broker cooperating compensation? And if so, how much? Because yeah, that should be the first thing you should do. You should do that. Because now I know that you're paying 5% commission. All right. And this is even before I entered into a contract with my buyer. Okay. Keep that in mind. If before I even enter a contract, if my buyer wants, if I'm going to take someone out this weekend and I have not written up a buyer agency contract, because remember, you have to have a buyer agency contract signed before you show a property. Before that buyer tours a property, you have to have a buyer agency contract. So if you know that you're going to show 5 properties this weekend, then contact the agents and find out the seller's agents and find out what the compensation is. So now if it's, you can, well, you would know. Because if they say, for instance, is nothing, well, that's something that you need to deal with. Because now you need to say to your buyer, hey, buyer, if you buy this property, there is no compensation. So that $15,000 that I'm expecting from you, you're going to pay it all because the seller is offering none. Or so it's best to contact the agent beforehand and find out there's compensation. Yes. Donna.
All right, and then I had one from Charles Boltici. I'm not sure if this was answered, but we'll put it out there. What if the seller provides a scooter to the buyer's agent who brings a sale in addition to the commission?
A scooter?
That's what it says.
If they
Charles,
offer-
can you unmute yourself and
I'm
is
gonna
that
give you a
possible?
scooter in lieu of commission or in addition to commission.
There is a practice where many developers will give a scooter to entice a sale on a new construction, for example. And you may not be aware of it early on, but it comes later. So how do you adjust for that with the buyer's agency contract? It's not a monetary. It's not a monetary.
But it has value though.
But it does have value, right?
Charles, I've never ever heard this, and I've been around a long time. I'm 40 years old. I've been around 50 years old.
Well, it's done frequently. It's done frequently on new projects here in Philadelphia.
This is new to me, and that's why I say I love doing this. I learned something. Where's my scooter? I like that.
Right. I understand. I understand.
Charles, I don't know the answer to that, but I would not accept a scooter from a seller as a form of commission. I personally think there's some issues. I don't know whether it's legal or ethical. I would not do it. I don't ever get close to a line because I believe if a scooter costs, I don't know what a scooter costs. What does it cost? 500?
Oh.
How much?
No. A scooter could actually cost several $1,000s, maybe $3,000 or $4,000.
But
yeah.
no, I definitely wouldn't. I would not. If one of my agents came to me and said the seller is going to offer me a scooter in addition to, I would say you can't do it. I would not. I don't know whether it's right or wrong. It sounds wrong to me, even if it's not. If it's legal, it doesn't sound ethical. I would not advise. I would not take it, and I would not let one of my agents take anything of value in addition to the commission. I want commission and I would say give the scooter to donate it to someone, to the Red Cross or someone where they can use it because there are people who need it, but I'm not accepting a scooter. Now I have gotten, well, I like I said, anyhow. But that was from my client.
Thank you. Thank you. I just wanted to clarify a non-monetary inducement for sale. That's all.
Again, I'm now interested, but I'm interested in knowing the answer to that. But I would suspect that most people would say you can't do it or it's not ethical. I don't know. What's another question, Donna?
Mia Bowie has her hand raised. Mia, you can unmute and ask.
Thank you. So going back to line 41, if a buyer you take them out, see a couple of showings, and then they decide to lease, and you didn't fill this out, should you just have them do a new contract for the tenant?
Wait, which line? Which line are you?
Line 41, under number 2C.
Under 2C. All right, go on. Yeah, 2C.
If a buyer leases a property instead of buying a property, if you not fill that out prior, should you do a new contract for the tenant agency, or
if they want to lease a property, you mean?
Right.
I would do that. See, I would do that. I think it makes sense. I would not. And again, I can't tell you how to fill out a contract. I think it makes more sense to just ask the buyer, hey, if there's someone you've been working with, let's sign a tenant agency contract since you now want to lease. But they may say no to that. So if they said no, at least you're protected. Now, I personally am never going to fill this out. Okay, I'm just not. But if you feel, but to protect yourself, you may, because even though I think it's better that they have the tenant agency contract, they may not want to sign that. So, but at least if they end up renting the property, at least you have the commission already there that they agreed to pay you. Because remember, they're not forced. They don't have to enter into a new contract with you. But if this already says if you don't buy and you lease, you have to pay me $3,000, they obligated to pay you $3,000.
Okay. Thank
All
you.
right. You're welcome. Anything else, Donna?
Can I ask a quick question, follow up?
Go on.
Mia, okay, sorry, I can't be on camera right now. In the instance that Mia was giving, would that be a point where you could put on that line to say something like a new contract will be entered into, like to say that you would sign a buyer agency contract, or should it have to be a dollar amount?
This should be a dollar amount. But this says the broker's fee is. I don't, you could do an addendum, or you can add on the bottom of this on the additional terms if that's something you want. I mean, that's not bad. If you say you could say something like that, that if the buyer decides not to purchase a property and decides to rent a property, the buyer agrees that we were entering into I guess you could do that. But I guess you could put that in the additional terms if the buyer agreed. Or you could already draw one up if you want. I don't think this is going to happen often. I've never, in all the years, and I tell people I've been involved in over 1,000 transactions in my career, I've never had a buyer decide to rent a property instead of buy it. I've never had that happen. So this is and I imagine, Joanne, how often did it happen to you? You're on mute, Joanne. Joanne.
Yeah, Trent, thank you.
Has that ever happened to you?
Forgive me, Trent. I got a text from a buyer for a minute. What was the question?
Have you ever had a buyer decide not to buy and chose instead to rent?
I mean, not since this happened, not since NAR.
I mean, but ever. Have you ever had it where you?
Yeah.
Where you were.
Yeah,
sure. They wanted to buy a property, but they changed their mind and decided to rent.
Well, or they couldn't find something and decided to rent. Yes.
Okay. But has it happened a lot?
No.
Okay. All right.
Hardly ever.
How about anybody else been around for a while? How many times has it happened to you? Anyone else has been around for a while? Any experience? Charles, that ever happened to you? Charles on his scooter. He probably can't hear me. All right.
No, I haven't heard it. But if I can back up for a moment, I beg your indulgence. How do you address seller bonuses in general? Is this something that you can write in as additional items at the end of the contract?
And the bonus the same as commission?
Well, it is, but it isn't. In other words, it would be applied as, let's say, 2.5% commission plus a bonus, because the developer wants to get some projects, some sales on the initial side of the project.
Charles, your broker, I don't care what you call it. If you bring in a $5,000 commission and a bonus of $1,000, I'm treating it as $6,000 commission.
Okay, I understand.
I imagine brokers. I'm not treating a bonus differently than I commit. I see a bonus as commission. If you're my agent and you bring in $5,000 plus $1,000 bonus, is a $6,000 commission, and you get your share of the $6,000. That's how I treat it. I don't know how other brokers treat it, because I can't talk to them about how they about their fees and all. But I look at it as just a part of a commission. I don't see bonus any differently than anything. And when I worked RE/MAX and other places, I think that's how. But I don't want to. Let's get back to this, because I think I'm losing you all a little bit. Let's go back to but that's how I would treat it, Charles. And we'll talk later about that scooter you're gonna give me. All right. Look at E. buyer understands and agrees that the buyer receives less. That we talking about, remember, if they give less, the buyer wants, you want $15,000 commission. You get in $12,000 commission from the listing agent. Buyer will be responsible, in all caps, buyer will be responsible for paying the remainder of broker's fee due to the broker at or before settlement. So this is something I'm glad is in caps, and you should make sure the buyer understands that if I'm receiving less commission than what we agreed to in this buyer agency contract, you owe the difference. Okay, remember, first you should go back to the listing agent and try to negotiate that difference. But if you can't, then the buyer has to pay you this. Let's keep using my same example. You negotiate $15,000 buyer broker commission. You get in $12,000. They owe you a difference of $3,000. Then they need to pay you $3,000. And they need to understand that they owe $3,000. Don't just skip over this part. This is kind of important. All right. Look at F. And now I want to go to G. Go to G. If the buyer enters into an agreement sale for a property after the end date of this contract, and we know sometimes it happens, not that often, the buyer will pay the broker's fee if, number one, the agreement sale is a result of the broker's action during the term of this contract. We call this a broker protection clause. The agreement sale is a result of the buyer's actions. I showed you the property. I got you approved. I did comps. I did everything. So you bought a property because of what I did. The contract ended yesterday, but I did all the work to get you to the point where you purchase the property where I have where my actions resulted from you getting this house or this property. Or the property was seen during the term of this contract. I obviously showed you the property. But the third one is if you'll be entitled to a commission if those two things are happening. But the third thing, but if the buyer has already entered into another exclusive buyer agency contract, you would not be entitled to a fee. The buyer, so you would have to have the agreement sale as a result of the broker's actions, or the property was seen during the term of the contract, and the buyer is not under an exclusive buyer agency contract with another broker. So if they're under an exclusive they enter into a new exclusive agency, a new exclusive buyer agency contract, then you wouldn't be entitled to a fee. All right. Number 3, dual agency. Obviously, we know that if you represent dual agency, the broker is a dual agency. It's a dual agent if both agents, if the buyer and the seller, if the broker, the company represents a buyer and the seller, could be 2 different agents. It could be 1 agent. The licensee, the salesperson, is a dual agent if they represent both the buyer and seller in the same transaction. All right. Again, the licensee is the dual agent if they represent both the buyer and the seller. The broker is a dual agent if the company represents both the buyer and the seller. It could be 2 different agents or it could be 1 agent. And one thing you must always have when you represent a dual agent, if you're a dual agent, what must you always have from both parties if you're going to be a dual agent? What is required of you? If you're going to be a dual agent, what must you get from both buyer and seller?
Signatures from both buyer and seller.
You have to get written consent. They both have to agree to allow you, because not everybody will allow you to represent both the buyer and the seller. A couple of times in my career, I've had a buyer say, "Oh, well, if you represent the seller, I don't want you to represent me." Or I've had sellers saying, "I don't want you to represent the seller. I mean the buyer. I only want you to represent me." Doesn't happen that often, but it has happened. But if you're a dual agent, you always have to have written consent from both parties. All right. 4, if your office practices designated agency, then obviously you don't have to check anything. But if your office does not practice designated agency, then you would check the box that says designated agency is not applicable. Only you will know if your office practices designated agency. I would know designated agency is, I always believe, now I know you can have, which I don't understand, you can have dual designate, what do they call it? Designate, you can have a designated agent can be a dual agent. It can be dual designated agency. Well, I always believe that the reason behind designated agency was to avoid dual agency. Because if you're a dual agency, you owe allegiances to two, you owe allegiances to two different people, and they may have conflicting interests. And that's why some states dual agency is not even allowed. Like here in Florida, dual agency is illegal. You can't represent both parties in the same transaction. You can represent one or the other. Designated agency, the broker would designate an agent to represent the exclusive interests of the seller, and he or she would represent an agent to represent the exclusive interests of the buyer. And so those two would not be dual agents, and they can't discuss anything about those clients with anyone outside of the broker. So you can fully represent that buyer if you're a designated agent, and you can fully represent. In order to be a designated agent, you have to be obviously in the same brokerage. It has to be an in-house. But a designated agent would be, I believe, and I don't practice designated agency, but I think a lot of offices or brokerages are going to it because it makes no sense to me, and maybe I'm just odd, to have dual designated agency, because why would, I don't know, I'm getting ahead of myself. If you don't practice designated agency, check that box. If you do, leave it blank. Number 5, broker services the others. Brokers may not take action that is inconsistent with buyer's interests. We know that because then you would be violating your fiduciary responsibility that you owe to that buyer if you take action that's inconsistent with their interests. Broker may provide services to a seller for which broker may accept a fee. This just talked about you could represent the seller. Just because I represent the buyer does not mean I can't represent the seller. It doesn't mean that I can't provide services to the seller. Maybe the seller wants me to order a UNO, and there's a fee. I just need to disclose this information, but that's not a conflict of interest that I work with. If I'm representing the buyer, that I perform services for the seller. All right. B, broker. Here's one that I think I've always had buyers say to me, and that you should not be showing this property to someone else if you're representing me. I've heard that in like probably 20 times in my day where I said, hey, I have a great house for you, but I'm showing it to someone else later. Well, wait a minute. I don't want you to show it to someone else. And they'll say, well, I said, well, wait, well, what do you mean? Well, you can't show it to someone else if I am your agent. You shouldn't show it to anyone else. I said, well, no, I can show it to as many people as I want. You may not be interested. You may offer less than what they want. I mean, I can't disclose what your offer is to the other person. I may write up once. I wrote up 4 offers on the same house. I have 4 different clients, 4 houses, but I'm not able to disclose what those offers are to either of the other buyers that I represent. The only people who will see those offers would be the seller's agent. So, so just take a look at B, 5B. Broker may show the same property to other buyers and may represent those buyers in attempts to purchase the same property that buyer wishes to purchase. Sometimes buyers think that if you're his or her agent, you shouldn't be showing this property to anybody but them. Buyer does not breach a duty to buyer by showing a property the buyer is interested in to other prospective buyers. This is not a conflict of interest, okay? Make sure you understand that. For some of the newer agents, you may hear that. You may think it's a conflict. It is not a conflict. You have a house in Westmount area that you have 5 buyers who will love it. You show it to all 5. There is nothing wrong with it. Clearly, you don't say to one buyer, I have another buyer who offered $300,000 for this. You probably should go higher. You clearly can't do that. You just write up the best offers for those individual buyers, present them to the seller, and hope you get one of them under contract. All right. Now, C, it talks about a conflict of interest. Showing the same property to different buyer clients of yours is clearly not. But C says it is a conflict of interest when broker or the licensee has a financial or personal interest in the property and cannot put the buyer's interest before any other. Broker will notify buyer in a timely manner if there is a conflict. If you have a conflict of interest, let's say you want to buy the same property that your buyer wants to buy. Well, that's a conflict. In that case, I would step out. I would let them get another agent. But why wouldn't I? Let me say this: I wouldn't buy that property if I'm showing it to one of my clients who's interested in it, and I'm interested in it. If they're not, I may, but I would not if they are. But if there is a conflict, you should disclose it. You should disclose it to that buyer. Paragraph 6: this entire contract is between the broker, again, between the broker and the buyer. And remember, statute of frauds requires a contract to sell a real estate with certain contracts must be in writing in order to be enforced in a court of law. You should not make verbal. If this is a written contract, if you're going to amend this contract, it should be in writing. Don't do verbal contracts. All right. If you have a written contract, the only way you should be amended is by writing. So if you're going to change anything, then you should do it in writing. Don't do verbal contracts. We don't do verbal contracts in real estate. Everything should be in writing. And it says any verbal or written agreement that were made before this contract was signed are not a part of this contract. All changes in this contract must be in writing and signed by both the buyer and the broker. But that's clear. You should never, as an agent, anytime you agree to anything, it should be in writing. An email is sufficient. A text is sufficient. Put it in writing. If your seller says to do something, if your buyer says something, if you agree to something, I always send an email saying, hey, per our conversation, blah, 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 blah. And I want you to just confirm that it's correct. And that's it. All right. That way, no one later on can say, wait, I didn't tell you to extend this listing. Well, you did. You told me that I should extend it to the middle of February. No, I didn't. Well, I sent you an email, but I didn't respond to that email. So always make sure they respond. Ask them is everything in this email correct as per our discussion? If so, just confirm that. All right. That way you don't have problems later. Again, there's only a problem until it becomes a problem. All right. Any questions or comments? Transfer of this contract. If you're a broker and you started you decided to merge with someone else, or you started a new company, this contract is you can transfer this contract to that new office. And the buyer is basically agreeing to it. Buyer agrees that the broker may transfer this contract to another broker when broker stops doing business. Broker forms a new real estate business, or broker joins his business with another. So, and it says broker will notify the buyer in writing immediately if this were to happen. So if I'm going to close my brokerage down and all my contracts are going to a new brokerage, then the buyer can't say, no, I'm not going to allow that. You've already agreed to that. Only thing the broker is required to do is to notify you in writing immediately that this is happening. All right. Confidentiality. We know, as we mentioned earlier, confidentiality lasts forever. Confidentiality does not end when this contract ends. It extends beyond the life of this contract. Whatever you learn from your buyer, you should keep confidential forever. All right. It says broker will not knowingly reveal or use any confidential information of buyer. Buyer understands a seller. So here's one that I think is kind of interesting. Buyer understands a seller or seller's representatives might not treat the existence, terms, or conditions of any offers as confidential unless there is a confidentiality agreement between the broker and the seller. Sometimes buyers, at least I've found in my day, that sometimes when you present an offer, if you represent the buyer and you present an offer to a seller, and the seller discloses the terms of that contract to other agents, they think there's something wrong with that. I have to tell buyers, once we present your offer, that seller can say, I have an offer from Sarah's client that's $400,000 with 6% seller assist. I have an offer from Gwen's from this off. There is nothing that says that seller's agent cannot disclose everything about that, what's in that any of the terms. Clearly, they shouldn't be disclosing things about, you know, that violate federal fair housing or the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act or the Philadelphia Commission on Human Relations. I forgot what it is locally, but you shouldn't be talking about, I have a client, this person's buying this is Latino, or this person's buying this, I think is African American or Asian or white. You should, or I think they're Jewish, or you should never, we as real estate agents, any protected class should never come out of your mouth. You should never, ever talk about the race of a client, the religion of the color, the disability status, the familiar status. You should never, those things should never come out of your mouth. And if someone says it, it's later on in here. And if someone and clients will ask you those questions, you should say, I cannot answer those. I can never engage in a conversation about people in a protected class. And that's later on in this film. Any questions or comments?
Yes. I always thought, now maybe I heard you wrong, but I always thought as a listing agent, you couldn't tell what the other offers were. I see somebody just answered my question. So if the seller says we can disclose what the other offers were, then we can do it, but we can't do it on our own.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm glad you said it right. The seller would have to give you permission. You could not do it on your own. Absolutely. I'm glad you said that because that clarifies it. Right. You have to ask the seller, can I disclose the existence of, first of all, the seller may say to you, and I have this conversation whenever I list a property. If I have multiple offers, how do you want me to handle it? Can I tell them the offers? Should I tell them there's only going to be this price, or how do you want? Most sellers will say, you do whatever you think is best. You work, as long as it's in my best interest. You do what you think will get me the best terms. So, but if the seller says, don't disclose anything about these offers, clearly you have to obey the instructions of your client. And obedience is one of the fiduciary responsibilities you owe to a client. So you cannot do it if your seller says not to. But most sellers, I would probably argue that most sellers are going to tell you do what you think is best. You're the professional, you're the expert. What do you think? But buyers just need to understand that their offers are not confidential. That's what you need to explain to a buyer. When I submit this offer to the seller, I don't know whether the seller's agent will disclose the terms of it or not. All you need to know is it's not confidential unless we have a confidentiality agreement. Now, 2 times in my career, I had confidentiality agreements, because one was somebody who was well known, who did not want people to know that he was looking for a property, and the seller had to agree before I could submit the offer that you can't reveal the identity of this person at all. And they agreed to. Another time, I had a woman who was in an abusive relationship, and I was selling her house, and everything had to be confidential because she was trying to move out of state. She didn't want the abuser to find out that she was moving. So everything, and I had to tell everybody that they had to keep the name. First of all, I tried to, the name was in public records, but I had to make sure everyone who showed the property or gave me offers, they knew the names, but they just couldn't disclose this property. You couldn't disclose anything about this transaction, even that your buyer was under contract. And you're welcome. Expertise, paragraph 9. Remember, you are not an expert in anything, but you should be an expert in real estate. You're not an expert in law. You're not an expert in science. You're not an expert in accounting. Stay on your lane. Stay on your lane. Do not decide that you're going to give advice on taxes or how they should take title or whether this property has environmental issues. You stick to your lane and let them seek out the advice of a professional. And that's what this paragraph talks about. Look at paragraph A. It says the buyer wants information regarding specific conditions or components of a property which are outside the broker or the licensee's area of expertise. Buyer is encouraged to seek the advice of an appropriate professional. B says if the buyer wants financial, legal, or any other advice, buyer is encouraged to seek the services of an accountant, a lawyer, or other appropriate professional. You are not an expert in these areas. If you are, that's different. But if you aren't, don't decide to don't become an expert in an area that you're not an expert, because this stuff comes back to bite you. And all right, any questions, comments, anything in Canvas? I mean, yeah, not Canvas. What do you call it? And any questions in the chat?
Yes, there are.
Read one to me. Somebody. Dana.
Hang on,
Oh,
hang on one
Cheryl.
second.
No,
Right.
Cheryl, you're gonna read it?
Yeah, how does paragraph F work if you were procuring cause of the sale, even if the buyer switches to another agent late in the process?
How does paragraph F
Work if you were the procuring cause of the sale, even if the buyer switches to another agent late in the process?
I don't understand the question, I guess. How did the buyer switch to another agent? How would they do?
So
I
this
don't know.
was Sharu Hoffman.
Maybe they can ask a question.
Hi. You were saying if you're working with the buyer, they switch to another agent, you don't get that commission. But if you did most of the work for that sale.
But no, I didn't say switch to another. What you're talking about?
Maybe I misunderstood the hypothetical.
What
I thought
are
you
talking
said
about G, paragraph G, where it says buyer ends an agreement sale after the end date. Is that what you're talking about?
No, I'm talking about, hold on, paragraph F. Let me just go take a
Paragraph
look at it.
F.
F as a, so
F,
what number?
Sorry, this was a little while ago.
All right.
Number
What-
53, 953, Trent.
What it?
I
Well, my
think-
lines are different from yours because mine is older.
It's 2F, 2F.
2F, yeah. I thought you said if the buyer goes ahead and switches, at the end that you don't get, I thought what you said is you're not entitled to the fee anymore. And
If
I
the
just
buyer,
was,
well, the buyer can't switch to another company because they have an exclusive buyer agency contract. They couldn't switch. If they did, they would still owe you the commission. Is that what you're asking?
yeah,
could-
I just thought you said something different, but
Yeah,
if that's,
no.
that
Yeah,
my
if the-
understanding is even if you're the procuring cause of the sale, they still owe you the commission, not the new
Exactly. If they're
agent.
the procuring cause, you would still, right. I agree
Okay,
with that.
that's all.
But,
Just was
but
confused.
because
Thank
they have
you.
an exclusive right to sell contract, if they go and sign another contract, they still owe you the commission because they signed an exclusive right to sell. They should only be working with one broker at a time if they have an exclusive. And if they decide to go to another brokerage and enter into another exclusive right to sell, then they would just be responsible possibly for two commissions to two different companies. And of
Oh,
course,
okay. Maybe I misunderstood you. I thought you said something different. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else?
Trent, yeah, we've got two more. To satisfy written consent for dual agency, will acknowledgement on the consumer notice be sufficient, or is there a separate document be required?
The agreement of sale actually says on the bottom that they consent, but I use a different form. I have a separate form that I use when I represent buyers and sellers. I want to make sure it's clear to the buyer and the seller that I'm representing both, or my agent is representing both buyer and seller in this transaction, and you both agree to it. I just have a form. I just think it's better because it's clear that there's a form that says I consent to dual agency. They both sign it, and now no one can come back later and say, wait a minute, I didn't know, I didn't fully understand that you were a dual agent. I always believed in this business, more is better, but simple. Don't overdo it, but always cover your bases. Make sure. I always think, what happens if there's a problem? That's how I've done real estate. I've never had a problem. what happens if there's a problem? So if there's and I'm thinking of a dual agency, if there's a problem, someone says, I didn't know you're a dual agent. Well, let me have a separate form signed by both of them. So now, could they come back and say, I didn't know? Well, you signed this form that says consent to dual agency. So it's hard to say you didn't know. I think we should protect ourselves, but we also want to make sure that our clients understand what it is that we do. I think sometimes we're so fast to want to get the transaction done that we can be sloppy sometimes in our ways. And I've served with Cheryl, I've served at professional standards for a while, and we see those cases all the time because people are just doing, I think, sloppy work, silly stuff that if you just took 3 minutes, you wouldn't be sitting before this hearing. That's why I said to take your time. It's not a rush. Take your time and do these documents, do them right, and cover your bases.
Trent, I appreciate your comment and your explanation. Is the form that you're referring to, is that available as a PAR form?
No, I just created one. I created that. Just a simple form. I mean, you don't have to, I mean, you have lawyers in your office, it's just simple. You can I created one and just consent to dual agency. And basically that you both agree to dual agency. That I will represent both parties in this transaction. Do you consent? If you do, sign and date. If you, buyer and seller, both sign in this document, they both get a copy. They now both understand that I'm representing both. I always make it clear that I represent both. I don't just, I want them to fully understand that I'm representing both of you, because I don't want anyone to later come back and say they didn't understand. And sometimes they don't fully understand. So I like to make my clients very aware of what's going on. And so they understand what my duties are and what I expect of them. I don't hide, but I don't have a lot of issues with my transactions. All right. I like transactions to go smoothly. I always believe that settlement's supposed to be a celebration. Okay. I'm supposed to be dancing to the bank. Okay. I shouldn't be at the settlement table fighting with you. It should be a celebration. Okay. I should be thinking about how I'm going to spend my money, whether I'm going to buy a new scooter or what I'm going to do with it.
Thank you so much.
So Trent, we have one more here. Once the buyer agency contract has been signed, are you able, or is there a document to change what was agreed on the commission from them without having to do the whole buyer agency contract again?
Is there a change? There is a change. There's a form called the change in buyer agency form, but I don't think it says about commission. Maybe you could. I'm sure you could just use. I'm sure you could use that form. There's a change. I have a copy of it. It's just a change in buyer agency form. I guess you can probably go on that. Yeah, it's change the buyer agency contract. Says a buyer and broker agree to change the terms of the above buyer agency contract as follows, and the last one says other. So I'm assuming you could use that if you wanted to change the commission, but make sure you're not changing it because the seller is paying less commission. Okay, don't change it because the seller is offering 12,000 and your contract is 15. Don't go and just change it to say the buyer only has to pay 12,000. You don't want to do that because the buyer owes you that 3,000. But again, whether I agree with that or not, let's just leave it at that. All right, let's go over the page. Where are we? What paragraph are we on? Paragraph what?
Brent, just so you know, the changes to buyer agency are one of the forms in the link that was provided in the chat earlier.
Okay, so that is there. Okay,
I'll put
good.
that in again.
All right, thanks, Donna. Deposit money. Deposit money. Brokers will keep, paragraph 10, broker will keep all deposit monies that the broker receives in an escrow account as required by the Real Estate License and Law, that's the Real Estate License and Registration Act, and the rules and regulations of the Real Estate Commission, until the sale is completed or an agreement of sale is terminated or the terms of a prior written agreement between the buyer and the seller have been met. Buyer and seller may name a non-licensee. And here's my problem. It's clear, if you ever heard me, I don't believe, okay, now I'm not saying you shan't do it, A non-licensee would be a lawyer or a title company holding the escrow. I personally don't like anyone other than a broker holding escrow. I know a lot of their companies that don't hold escrow. Even those companies, I say, I'll hold the escrow. I don't like title companies and lawyers holding escrow. Why? Because lawyers and title companies are not bound by the rules and regulations of the Real Estate Commission or the Real Estate License and Registration Act as to what they do if there's a dispute. If there is a dispute in real estate, brokers know exactly, and we'll talk about there's 4 things that they can do. 1 of 4 things. They cannot, if a broker's holding escrow, if there's a dispute, they can't just decide to give it to the buyer. They can't decide who's at fault or who gets the money, or they can't decide I'm gonna split it. The title company's escrow agreement or the attorney's escrow agreement, I don't know what they say. So if an escrow, if a title company is holding escrow, at least have an escrow agreement and read it and find out what happens if there's a dispute. Because what happens if the buyer clearly breached it, but the title company decided after 5 days, they just give it back to the buyer. Those escrow agreements, because I don't ever agree. And then one of the things I say to my sellers, if that's an issue, my sellers will not accept an offer. It's just clear as that. It's clear as that. That's a conversation I have with my seller. I don't know what those escrow contracts say. I want a broker holding this money, because if there's an issue, I know what that broker can and cannot do. I don't know what this lawyer is not governed by the Real Estate License and Registration Act. He or she is governed by maybe the bar association or a title company, maybe governed by someone else. I want to know if there is a problem, what is happening with my client's money, or what I have to do if there's a problem. So I know I'm a little passionate about this. I don't like anyone holding escrow but brokers. Not to say that you can't do it. The title companies hold it. I'm not saying there's nothing wrong with it. I just don't like it. I don't like it for my clients. I just won't allow it. So anyhow, does everybody else have a problem with that? Anybody understand why I'm a little passionate about that? Everybody think about that brokers, if there's an issue, what a broker can't decide it. Hey, I just decided to give the money back. Well, we know a broker would be in trouble if that broker did that. But if the title company decided to just return the money to the buyer, even though the buyer breached the contract, then we don't know, because I don't know what the contract says. But again, if the title company is holding it, at least get a copy of the escrow agreement and make sure you understand what happens if there's a dispute. All right. So regardless, now here's paragraph, look at 10B. This tells me what a broker can do if there's a dispute. So I'm clear what happens if there's a dispute. Regardless of the apparent entitlement to deposit monies, Pennsylvania law does not allow a broker holding deposit monies to determine who is entitled to the deposit monies when settlement does not occur. That is clear. That is a law of this state. The law says, the Real Estate License and Registration Act is clear that a broker can't decide who is entitled to the money if the seller says, nope, I get to keep the money. The buyer says, nope, I want the money. When you return deposit money, do you need to have release agreed? Yes, the answer is yes. I would say absolutely yes, and that should be in the contract. We'll talk about it. Where is it? The release, agreement sale release. It should be one of the documents. The agreement sale release and distribution of deposit money. You should always have this signed by both the buyer and the seller. I'm a broker. I'm not releasing any money unless I have this, or we can talk about the other things that one other way I can release it. Go back to B. Regardless of the parent entitlement to deposit monies, Pennsylvania law does not allow a broker holding deposit monies to determine who is entitled to deposit money when settlement does not occur. Broker can only release the deposit monies, 1 of 4 things. 1, if an agreement of sale is terminated prior to settlement and there is no dispute. Well, you know how there's no dispute? I know there's no dispute because you gave me an agreement of sale release and distribution of funds that says all the money goes back to the buyer. The buyer does a home inspection, decides they don't want to go forward with the property. That's an easy one, but you want the seller to agree to sign off on it. Not a dispute. I give back the money to the buyer, the money in full. Number two, there was a dispute, but it's been resolved. Number two, if after the broker has received deposit monies, broker receives a written agreement, again, this agreement sale release is what you could use in distribution of deposit monies, that is signed by the buyer and the seller, directing the broker how to distribute some or all the deposit monies. Well, maybe there was a dispute between the buyer and the seller, and they said, okay, buyer, you take half, I take half. Well, you give me this agreement sale release, and then half goes to the seller, half goes to the buyer, or 75% goes to the seller, 25% to the buyer. But I have, again, there was a dispute, but it's resolved. How do I know it's been resolved? Because I have an agreement and release and a distribution of funds telling the broker how to distribute these monies. You all with me? Number three, according to the terms of a final, keyword there is final order of court. Well, I have a final court order saying that seller is entitled to this money. As a broker, I can distribute this money to the seller. All right. And number four, according to the terms of a prior written agreement between the buyer and the seller. Where is that prior written agreement? Is in the agreement of sale, paragraph 26. I think I made a copy of it. Did I copy paragraph? Yes, so I can. Paragraph, I know it's paragraph 26C. I thought I made a copy. I wanted to read it to you. Thought I just caught. Oh, no, it must not have. Oh, well. Is it here? Well, it's paragraph 26 there. I thought I made a copy. I guess I did. Paragraph 26C says that if the buyer, I thought it was somewhere here, maybe not. If the buyer, wait a minute. Hold on, stupid. It's on my books. Let me see if I have an agreement still here. Somewhere. Yeah. Bear with me, 20, yeah, I think all right, yeah, okay. Paragraph 26, I said I think it's 26C, right? What is it? 26C it is. In your agreement of sale, paragraph 26C, you can look at that under default termination return of deposits. Here's what 26C says in your agreement of sale. This is what we call the prior written agreement. So in the agreement of sale, the buyer and the seller have already agreed what can happen to the money if there's a dispute, because this is what it says. Buyer and seller agree that if there is a dispute over the entitlement to deposit monies that is unresolved, there's a blank there, it has 180 days. In 180 days, that's the default position. Whatever you do, don't leave 100 days, put 30 days or 60 days, 45, don't leave 100. That's like half a year. Let's read it again, it's 30 days. Buyer and seller agree that if there is a dispute over the entitlement to deposit money that is unresolved 30 days after the settlement or following after the settlement date or following termination of the agreement, whichever is earlier, then the broker holding deposit monies will, within 30 days of receipt of the buyer's written request, distribute deposit monies to the buyer unless the broker is in receipt of verifiable written notice that the dispute is a subject of litigation or mediation. In other words, this is saying that, let's read this, we had 30. If after 30 days, the seller, there's a dispute. Seller says, I want the commission, I want the deposit money. Buyer says, I want to return it. And this in paragraph 26C says 30 days. Nothing's happened in 30 days. Now the buyer can send a letter. It could be an email to the broker of that company saying, return my deposit money. Why? Because the seller has not initiated litigation or mediation. So the seller's done nothing after that 30-day period. So now, once that broker receives that letter, the broker has 30 days. Within 30 days, that broker must give that money back to the to the buyer, even if the buyer's wrong. Okay, I'm not saying who's wrong or right. The broker is not determining right or wrong this here. The broker is simply following paragraph 26C, which is an agreement that the buyer and the seller made in this contract. So let me say this again. We read this 30 days. 30 days have passed. There's a dispute. Seller says, I'm entitled to deposit money. Buyer says, is my money, give it to me. Broker's holding it. The broker at that point is just an escrow agent, and the broker can do nothing. Now, 30 days has passed. The seller has not filed mediation. The seller has not initiated any lawsuit. Seller has done nothing. Buyer simply sends a letter to the broker saying, per paragraph 26C, please return my earnest money deposit. The broker has within 30 days, per this contract, to return the buyer's earnest money deposit in full. Now, if the seller says, wait a minute, I don't want you to return that money. Wait, they gave you a letter saying return the money. I'm going to run down. I'm going to call Cheryl at GPAR and I'm going to initiate mediation. Well, it's too late, because once I get that letter, I'm duty bound to return the money. All right. I have to. It can't be, because once I get the letter, even though I have 30 days returning, I still have to return it, even if the seller decides to run out and initiate mediation and litigation. So keep that in mind, that in paragraph 26, you can put 5 days, you can put 10 days, you can put 15 days, you can put whatever, but I wouldn't leave it at 180 days, because if there's an issue, this is how you can get your money back if the seller is just going to sit there and do nothing. You don't want to wait 180 days with the seller saying, oh, I'm not doing anything, no big deal, but I'm not agreeing to give you money back. Now, the one caveat I will add in here, if you go to the last paragraph, even it says buyer and seller agree, again, 26C, buyer and seller agree that the distribution of deposit monies based upon the passage of time does not legally determine entitlement to deposit monies, and that the parties maintain their legal rights to pursue litigation even after distribution is made. This is saying that the seller can still sue for the money. It just means that the buyer has the money back in his or her account. Seller can go back and sue, but is a seller likely to sue for a couple of thousand? Probably not. If you're talking about 20,000, probably will. But if you're talking a few thousand, not a good chance that the seller is going to waste his or her time, or the attorney's fees will probably be more than that. So any questions about that? So that's number 4. So number 1, the broker can only release the money if there is no dispute. And how do we know there's no dispute? They've signed an agreement, sale, release, and distribution earnest money deposit. Number 2, there was a dispute, but buyer and seller agreed on how to distribute the money. They signed an agreement of release. And number 3, the broker was given a final court order. And 4, buyer and seller have agreed to this paragraph 26C, this pre-agreement disclosure. Any questions or comments? I know there was a lot. Nothing? You don't care? How many of you just don't care? You'd rather be out.
Thank you, Trent. You cleared that up.
I know it's warm in Philadelphia. You're probably thinking, I want to get out and take a walk. Because it's probably, what is it, 70, 80? So you probably figured, I wish you hurry up so I can get outside and take a walk. Let's go on the page. All right, paragraph 11, Civil Rights Act. All agents should know better than this, and no agent should be engaged in discrimination. And if you have clients who want you to discriminate against anyone, you should first, people usually say, what do you do, walk away? I said, no, you don't walk away first, you educate first. I've had people say, I don't want children in here, and they don't know, so you educate them. But if they say, oh, I know I'm not supposed to, but I don't want children anyhow, well, then you walk away. Don't ever take a listing or work with a buyer who says, I don't want to live next to anybody who's African American. I only want to live next to this, or I don't want to live next to gay couple. You educate, and if they insist, you should walk away, because we should not be engaging in any kind of behavior that is discriminatory towards anybody, whether you like Muslims or Jews or Christians or Buddhists or not. You're a professional, and you should always behave in a manner that is professional. Civil Rights Act, federal and state laws make it illegal for a seller, broker, or anyone to use race, and that's any race. If you're human, you fall into a race, any race. Color, that would be any color. Religion, that would be any religion or no religion. Okay, there's some people who don't believe in anything. That means you don't say, "Oh well, I'm not gonna." I got a settlement at 12, and my client keeps calling me. All right, let's say religion, sex. Sex includes, of course, gender identity, sexual orientation falls under sex, disability, mental or physical disability, familiar status, families with children under 18, a pregnant woman will fall under that familiar status. Age in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, age is a protected class. So if you're 40 or older. National origin, the country in which your ancestors originate, and the use of a support animal. If you discriminate against people based on a protected class, not only can you lose your license, but you can lose your liberty. All right, don't do it. No commission is worth you engaging in discrimination. Is not worth it. Number 12. This language is mandated by state law. It has to be here. But you have to know the notice regarding convicted sex offenders. Pennsylvania General Assembly passed legislation about, I'm going to read it, the Megan's Law. If you're a convicted sex offender, you have to register your address, and you would just tell people, if they ask, they would go, this is here. You have to go to www.pamagonslaw.state.pa.us if you want to find out where. If you have a client who says, I don't want to live on a block, or I don't want to live close to a convicted sex offender, should you ever if your client asks you to check this website for them, should you do it?
No.
No. My computer's about to die. No. Because if you do it and you happen to miss a convicted sex offender, I'm sorry, then you will be in trouble. I'm sorry, my computer's about to die. So don't do that. Buyer inspections. Buyer understands that the property is being purchased in its present condition, is an as-is condition. So unless the buyer does a home inspection, or unless they do some type of inspection, the default position is that you buy this property in its as-is condition. Obviously, the seller may have to provide a seller's disclosure. There may be information on MLS about the property. But remember, if you broker, you need to make sure the buyer understands that you didn't verify any of this information. If they want to, they can verify it. And how can you do it? By getting a home inspection. But just because someone says that I have not ever had termites, it does not mean that that property does not have termites. So you need to verify. Buyers should verify for themselves, not rely on what a seller says or what the MLS has on it or what the seller's disclosure says. Because sometimes sellers get it wrong. Sometimes sellers don't know. Sometimes sellers lie. All right. Any questions? Recordings on the property. Any person who intentionally intercepts oral communications by electronic or other means without the consent of all parties is guilty of a felony under Pennsylvania law. Buyers should not make recordings on the property that capture the oral statements of other persons without having the full consent of all parties, persons who are parties to the communication. And the other paragraph talks about how you should be aware that sellers, even though you're not supposed to be recording people without their consent, will two-party consent state. If I want to record you, I need your permission. But you should let buyers be aware that if you are having negotiations in that property, someone may be listening. And I've been there where I know I was before I remember the first time I went to the house, and it was all kinds of fancy technology. We're in the basement. I had a question. I couldn't think. It was all technology. And I had a question. And what comes on? The agent comes on and answers my question and scared us all. So that means the agent was listening in on our conversations throughout the house. So I said, don't say another word. And I say, so now I tell buyers, don't say anything until we leave this house. Don't talk about what you want to offer. Don't talk about anything. Look at the property. I don't want you to say anything until we get out, because I don't know who's listening in. We know everyone has cameras now, right? We know everybody has Ring cameras and other cameras, and I don't know, cameras all over. So I tell some buyers, so make sure buyers aren't getting into a property and talking about, oh my God, this is the best property I've seen. It's only $550. I think it's too low. Oh my God. Oh, let's make it $550. And then you offer $450, and the seller was hearing, the seller's agent was listening in, and they would have taken $450, but since they heard you say you were willing to get $550, they counter at full price. So just be mindful of that. All right, paragraph 15, Recovery Act. Pennsylvania has a Real Estate Recovery Act to repay any person who has received the final court ruling against a Pennsylvania real estate licensee because of fraud, misrepresentation of the receipt, and a real estate transaction. Again, this is required by the Real Estate License Registration Act. If you engage in behavior, if you engage in fraudulent or behavior against your client, this buyer, and they get a civil judgment against you, they can't collect, then they get to go to the Real Estate Recovery Fund within 1 year. After they've made all attempts to collect from you, they couldn't. They have 1 year to go to the Real Estate Recovery Fund, and they can collect up to $20,000 from the Real Estate Recovery Fund. Be mindful of talking outside into the house. I would agree with that too. Be mindful of talking outdoors. Yeah, I would agree with whoever just put that. Don't even talk too close, because some, Ring cameras may be picking up stuff, or you can hear things. Yeah, be mindful. Get away from the property when you decide to do your negotiations. Special clauses, if you wanted to put in special clauses, then you could. This has single agency addendum. If you don't practice dual agency, you would use the single agency addendum. You would obviously check that. If your office is a practice designated agency, then use the single agency form. Further down, it says buyer has read and received a consumer notice. Remember, that's a required disclosure, so you should have a consumer notice. Once you start, at this point, you have to have a consumer notice, and the buyer has said that I've read it and I have a copy of this required disclosure. Buyer has read the entire contract before signing it. If buyer was obtaining mortgage financing, buyer shall promptly deliver to broker a copy of the loan estimates and closing disclosure. Remember, the title company, the lender is not sending you the loan estimate or the closing disclosure. They have to send them to the client. So make sure that they send those documents to you once they get them. Returning this contract can be by electronic transmission, bearing all the signatures of all parties, constitutes accepted. So obviously you can sign this electronically. That's just like signing it. Electronic signature is the same as a wet signature. This contract may be executed in one or more counterparts, each of which shall be deemed to be an original, and which counterpart, well, in other words, if there are two buyers, you send the exact identical contract to two people, they can sign it, and you can put those two together and make it one contract. Obviously, they have the same contract, but two people can sign them separately, and you can put it together. Clearly, it's better to have them sign the same contract, but sometimes you may have one client, and now with DocuSign and all, it just makes it a lot easier. This contract, okay, then it says before signing, buyer has legal questions. Buyer's advised to consult a Pennsylvania real estate attorney, and it says Pennsylvania. I had a client last week who told me, I can't believe it. She said that she was a seller. She and her mother entered into the deed, and they had joint tenants with the right of survivorship. She told me that a lawyer told her that she didn't have to sign, that only her mother has to sign the deed when they transfer the property. I said, really? And I said, a lawyer in PA? She said, oh no, he's in Mississippi. And I kept asking, and he's disbarred. I said, so a disbarred lawyer in Mississippi told you that a joint tenant does not have to sign the deed. I said, well, at least I know why he was disbarred. I said, next time, call a PA lawyer if you want legal advice, okay? Not call a disbarred lawyer in Mississippi. And that's a true story. Okay. This just happened last week. I couldn't believe it. I said, well, why would a lawyer tell you that if you're a joint tenant, you all own it jointly? Why would you not have to sign the deed? What? So anyhow. All right. So if you have legal questions, don't ever tell a buyer, don't seek the advice of a lawyer. Don't ever discourage them from doing that. If they feel like they need a lawyer to look at this, you should encourage them and say, yes, have a lawyer look at it. And you can have a lawyer call me if there are questions, or you have questions after talking to a lawyer, call me back. But don't say, oh, you don't need to talk to a lawyer. You don't need, this is simple. You don't need to talk to a lawyer. Just sign, because, just don't do that. All right. Buyer should sign and date. Again, I say you should be the one to sign second. Always have the buyer sign first. When you sign, then you know what the execution date is. The broker's company, of course, that's the name of the broker. That's your company. And make sure you put it, these are legal documents. Make sure you put the name of the broker, the brokerage as it appears on the license. Don't put just Compass. Okay, if you Compass, I don't know if they all do. Let's say, I don't know, I think Compass all do. Remax, if you put Remax first, and don't just put Remax. If your company is called Remax First, it should be Remax First. If that's on your license, don't just say Remax. Don't just say Keller Williams. Don't just say, just put the name that's on your license. You sign it, of course, on the behalf of the broker, and you should give a copy of this contract to the buyer at the time that they sign it. That is mandated by the licensing law, that you cannot give them a copy later. You should get, anytime a client or anyone signs anything, you should give them a copy at the time that they sign, not 60 hours later, not the following day, at the time that they sign. If they're in the office, you make a copy. If you're somewhere out meeting them at a coffee shop, then take 2 copies and then give them a copy after they sign. Any questions? I think it's 11 o'clock. Any questions or comments?
Thank you, Trent.
Thank you.
As usual, you were wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Can I get a scooter?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
Where's
so much.
Charles?
Very
Charles?
helpful.
Thank you.
Yes,
Trent,
sir.
great job.
Thank you
Great
so
job.
much.
Thank
Great
you.
job by all you guys too.
I actually had a question. I couldn't get my Zoom to work.
No, I'm here. I'm listening.
This is going back to escrow deposit. I actually had a transaction. I was a buyer. It's like years ago. I didn't realize I could ask to get it back. Is it too late now or what?
Wait, it was too late to do what?
It's been years since we didn't go through with a settlement on a property. Could I still request the deposit back at this point?
Well, is the broker still holding it?
I don't know what they did. They probably released it to the seller, I would think.
But remember, they count, unless the seller, how long has this been? 6 months? 8 months?
Like 5+ years.
5 years?
Maybe 10. Like I didn't know.
I'm not ready for that. No, they should have kept it themselves. 10 years. Now, of course, I doubt that they're holding that money after 10 years. I would leave that one alone.
All right.
10 years is, yeah. I mean, the broker may, you at some point you can turn the money over to the state, you know that. But I would be.
If they release it to the seller, do I have recourse there or not?
What was that?
If they released it to the seller, do I have any recourse on that end?
10 years ago? I don't know the answer to that. Is the company still in existence?
I have to look it up.
I would say yes. I don't believe there is any statutory limit on that. I mean, I've seen mediations, wherein people have moved into the property and now, this is leaking, this isn't working, and it's years later.
Well, the thing is, a broker can't release the money unless he or she has a release from the signed by the buyer and the seller. Clearly, you don't have that unless if they exercise this paragraph 26C. Even if it's been 10 years, clearly 180. If it says 180 days, the buyer could have said, "Hey, give me the money back," and they would have to return it. But you may, contact that office and see if they still have it.
All
Yeah,
right, maybe talk
I
to
have a
GPAR on
suggestion
that.
here. I have a suggestion. Tom, I would call PAR's legal
Our
hotline.
legal.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Good idea. Yeah.
That's a great member benefit. You can call them at 1-800-555-3390.
Oh, I've definitely talked to them on other matters. I actually had another one where the seller tried to keep my buyer's deposit. It turned out the guy was falsifying certificate of occupancies, all this other stuff. And then this was super helpful to know to write in like 60 or 30 days because we had to wait 6
Exactly.
months and then still go to the court. And the court's like, I don't know if I even have jurisdiction, but when we went back the second time, they told Compass to release it and they did. And it was like a $19,000 deposit my buyer put down on his house.
Okay, yeah, so give them
I
a
think-
buzz.
I
Give
think-
them a buzz. That would probably help
Yeah.
you out a ton.
I
there.
Yeah,
think
I will do that.
Yeah, legal hotline is great. Any other questions?
I have a question. So I just want to go back to, my name is Charlotte Bradley. I just want to go back to one of my colleagues that was asking earlier, and I don't think that the question was understood. He was saying, because I want the answer to the question, sometimes the builders offer bonuses, and he was asking where would that be put at on the agreement because you don't really know what the bonus is, but you already have an existing agreement. So where would that be covered at? And your buyer agency agreement, if a builder offers a bonus, where would you put that at of what to do with it? So I'm asking again, where would a bonus go?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
I think a bonus should be treated as commission. So I don't know how bonus is different. See, a bonus, I think most brokers, if there are any brokers here would agree, if you had a bonus, if you brought in a commission of 10,000 and you got a bonus of 1,000, is 11, I just see $11,000 commission. I don't separate out. I don't think a broker will separate out a bonus. So I don't know how you would put that. I view it as just commission. Bonus to me is commission because so I don't know how you would, and I may just not know the answer to that. And maybe that's an answer for the hotline, because I don't know how you would put bonus. I don't know the answer to that. And maybe that's a good question for the hotline. How would you put that on the buyer agency contract if there's a bonus? I don't know.
Like if someone wanted new construction, but you don't know they offering bonus till you start showing. I think that's what he was intending to ask, but thank you.
Yeah. You're right. I don't know that. And maybe I should have known that, but I would contact the legal hotline. I think that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. Any other questions? Or any other comments? All right. If not, I thank you all. And
Thank you, Trent.
You're welcome.
Have a good day,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank
Have
you.
a good day.
Enjoy that cold weather down there, Trent.